Good evening, dear listeners. This is Frank Sterling, and welcome once again to our journey through the shadows of history, where the past whispers its secrets to those willing to listen. Tonight, I invite you to travel back in time, far beyond the familiar chronicles of European exploration, to a moment when the ancient mountains of what we now call the Appalachians held secrets that would shape the destiny of an entire continent. It is the year 1519, and the world stands on the precipice of change that few could imagine. In the heart of these ancient peaks, where eagles soar and mist clings to granite faces carved by millennia, lived a people who called themselves the Nvhi, the principal people. We know them today as the Cherokee, but in 1519 they were still masters of their own destiny, unaware that across the vast ocean, ships with white sails were already cutting through Atlantic waves, carrying men whose arrival would forever alter the course of history. Our story begins with a young warrior named Atsila, whose name means fire in the Cherokee tongue. Like many young men of his generation, Atsila lived in a world where the greatest mysteries were spiritual rather than technological, where wisdom came from dreams and visions rather than written words, and where the future seemed as eternal and unchanging as the mountains themselves. But the spirits had other plans for Atsila. They would choose him to become a bridge between worlds, a keeper of ancient knowledge, and a guardian of his people's future. For in the hidden places of the earth, artifacts of unimaginable age waited to reveal their secrets, and prophecies older than memory prepared to unfold. What you are about to hear is a tale of discovery and destiny, of love and loss, of the collision between worlds that would echo through the centuries. It is a story that reminds us that the greatest changes in history often begin not with the clash of armies or the signing of treaties, but with a single individual who dares to look beyond the horizon of the known world. So settle back, close your eyes, and let your imagination carry you to a time when the future was still unwritten, when ancient wisdom held the keys to survival, and when the stars themselves seemed to whisper warnings of the changes to come. Chapter 1. The Vision Quest. The morning mist clung to the mountainsides like the breath of sleeping spirits as Atsila began his ascent into the high country. It was the third day of his vision quest, a sacred journey that every young Cherokee warrior must undertake to discover his path in life and receive guidance from the spirit world. His father, Nvhi, the peace chief of their village, had blessed this journey with words both proud and worried.
The spirits call to those who are ready to hear them. But remember, my son, not all visions are meant to be understood immediately. Some are seeds that will only bloom when the time is right.
Atsila carried with him only the essentials: a water gourd, a small pouch of parched corn, his hunting knife, and the sacred tobacco that would help him commune with the spirits. He had fasted for 2 days, purifying his body and mind for whatever revelations awaited him in the high places where earth touched sky. The Cherokee believed that the mountains were the dwelling places of the thunder beings, powerful spirits who controlled the weather and watched over the people. It was here, in their domain, that the most profound visions came to those brave enough to seek them. Atsila had heard the stories of other young men who had returned from their quests with prophecies, with knowledge of healing plants, or with songs that could call rain in times of drought. As he climbed higher, the familiar sounds of the village faded behind him. The chatter of children, the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic pounding of corn being ground into meal, all of it disappeared into the vast silence of the wilderness. Here there was only the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant cry of a hawk, and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. By midday, Atsila had reached a plateau he had never seen before, despite having hunted these mountains since boyhood. It was a circular clearing surrounded by ancient oaks, their massive trunks scarred by lightning, but still standing proud and strong. In the center of the clearing stood a single stone, perfectly round and smooth, as if shaped by countless years of wind and rain. Something about this place felt different. The air itself seemed to hum with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand up. Birds fell silent as he approached, and even the ever-present mountain breeze seemed to hold its breath. Atsila knew, with the certainty that comes from deep spiritual connection, that this was where his vision would come. He sat cross-legged before the stone, facing east toward the rising sun, and began the ritual preparations. First, he offered tobacco to the 4 directions, speaking the ancient prayers his grandfather had taught him. Then he settled into the meditative state that would open his mind to the spirit world. Hours passed. The sun traced its arc across the sky, while Atsila sat motionless, his consciousness drifting between the physical world and the realm of spirits. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, the vision finally came. It started as a whisper in his mind, a voice speaking in the old language, words so ancient that he understood them not with his ears, but with his heart. The voice spoke of changes coming from across the great water, of men with pale skin and metal weapons who would bring both knowledge and destruction. It spoke of a time when the Cherokee would be forced to choose between resistance and adaptation, between holding on to the old ways and learning new ones. But the most powerful part of the vision was yet to come. As the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Atsila saw something that made his heart race with both fear and wonder. In his mind's eye, he saw himself standing in a cave deep within the mountain, holding an object that pulsed with inner light, a crystal of impossible beauty that contained within it the wisdom of ages. The vision showed him the path to this cave, winding through hidden valleys and secret passages that no Cherokee had walked for generations. It showed him the trials he would face and the knowledge he would gain. Most importantly, it showed him that this crystal was not just a source of wisdom, but a key to his people's survival in the dark times that lay ahead.
Spirits of the mountain, I understand. I will find this crystal. I will save my people.
When the vision ended, night had fallen, and the stars shone with unusual brightness in the clear mountain air. Atsila felt changed, marked by what he had experienced. The carefree young warrior who had begun the climb that morning was gone, replaced by someone who carried the weight of prophecy and the responsibility of his people's future. He spent the night in the clearing, wrapped in his deerskin cloak, dreaming of crystal caves and distant ships with white sails. When dawn broke, he knew his true quest was just beginning. The vision had shown him the way, but the journey to the crystal cave would test every skill he possessed and every ounce of courage in his heart. As he began his descent toward the village, Atsila carried with him not just the memory of his vision, but a burning certainty that the world was about to change in ways that few could imagine. The spirits had chosen him to be a guardian of ancient knowledge and a guide for his people through the trials to come. Behind him, the mysterious stone in the clearing caught the morning light, seeming to pulse with the same inner radiance he had seen in his vision of the crystal. The mountain itself seemed to be watching, waiting to see if this young Cherokee warrior would prove worthy of the destiny that had been laid before him. The first chapter of a great adventure had begun, though Atsila could not yet know that his vision quest would ultimately lead not just to personal enlightenment, but to the preservation of his people's future, in a world that was about to be turned upside down by the arrival of strangers from across the sea. Chapter 2: The Sacred Cave. The journey to the Crystal Cave took Atsila 3 days through terrain that seemed to exist outside the normal geography of the Cherokee lands. Following the path shown to him in his vision, he traveled through valleys that appeared on no mental map he carried, crossed streams that flowed in directions that defied the natural watershed of the mountains, and climbed ridges that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. On the second day, as he navigated a particularly treacherous section of loose shale and exposed granite, Atsila began to understand that this was no ordinary journey. The very landscape seemed to be testing him, presenting obstacles that required not just physical skill, but spiritual strength to overcome. When he approached each challenge with respect and humility, acknowledging the power of the mountain spirits, the way forward became clear. When doubt or impatience crept into his mind, the path seemed to vanish entirely. It was near sunset on the 3rd day when he finally found the entrance to the cave. Hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines and partially concealed by a rockfall that looked ancient beyond measure, the opening was exactly as his vision had shown him. A narrow cleft in the mountain face that seemed to exhale cool, sweet air, carrying the scent of deep earth and something else, something that made his spirit sing with recognition. Atsila paused at the threshold, offering tobacco and prayers to whatever guardians might dwell within. The Cherokee understood that caves were sacred places, wombs of the earth where powerful spirits resided. To enter without proper respect was to invite disaster. As he spoke the ritual words, he felt a subtle shift in the air around him, as if unseen presences were evaluating his worthiness. The cave entrance was narrow, forcing him to squeeze through sideways. But once inside, it opened into a vast chamber that took his breath away. The walls were covered with paintings and symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Not the familiar pictographs of his own people, but something far older, more complex, depicting scenes and concepts that stretched his understanding to its limits. Some of the images showed the night sky with constellations marked in precise detail, but not as they appeared in Atsila's time. These were star maps of the past or future, showing the heavens as they had been or would be in ages distant from his own. Other paintings depicted great cities with towers that reached toward the clouds, populated by people whose clothing and tools were unlike anything in Cherokee experience. But it was the paintings of the sky people that truly amazed him. Tall, graceful figures with elongated limbs and large, wise eyes shone descending from the stars in vessels that gleamed like polished metal. These beings were depicted teaching and learning, sharing knowledge with humans who looked remarkably like the ancestors of the Cherokee. The paintings suggested a time of great cooperation and mutual understanding between earth and sky. As Atsila moved deeper into the cave, following a path that seemed to glow faintly beneath his feet, he came to understand that this place was far older than Cherokee memory. It was a repository of knowledge left by those who had come before. A library written in stone and crystal that had waited through countless generations for someone worthy to discover its secrets. The chamber narrowed again, leading him through a series of smaller rooms, each containing its own wonders. In one, he found perfectly preserved tools made from metals he couldn't identify, their surfaces unmarked by rust or corrosion despite their obvious age. In another, crystalline formations grew from floor and ceiling in patterns that seemed to pulse with mathematical precision, creating harmonies that he could feel in his bones rather than hear with his ears. Finally, after what felt like hours of exploration, Atsila reached the heart of the cave. The chamber that opened before him was circular and domed, its walls covered entirely in a mosaic of crystals that caught and reflected light from sources he couldn't identify. The effect was like standing inside a star, surrounded by points of light that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. At the center of this crystalline cathedral stood a pedestal carved from a single piece of black stone, and upon it rested the object from his vision, a crystal unlike anything he had ever seen or imagined. It was roughly the size of a human head, multifaceted like a jewel, but with surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like water. Within its depths, lights moved and danced, creating patterns that drew the eye and held it captive. As Atsila approached the pedestal, the crystal began to pulse more brightly, as if responding to his presence. When he was close enough to touch it, he hesitated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was about to do. This was clearly an object of immense power, and he was just a young Cherokee warrior who had stumbled into something far beyond his understanding. But the vision had brought him here for a purpose, and he could feel the weight of that destiny pressing upon him. With a prayer to his ancestors and the spirits who had guided him, Atsila reached out and placed his hands upon the crystal's surface. The moment his skin made contact with the crystal, the world exploded into light and sensation. Visions flooded his mind with such intensity that he cried out, his voice echoing through the chamber like thunder. He saw the history of the world unfolding before him, the rise and fall of civilizations, the coming and going of ice ages, the slow dance of continents across the face of the earth. He saw the builders of this cave, the ancient ones who had possessed knowledge that made them seem like gods to later generations. They had known of the great changes that would come to the world, had foreseen the arrival of peoples from across the oceans, and had prepared this repository of wisdom for those who would need it in the dark times ahead. But most importantly, he saw the future, his future, and that of his people. The crystal showed him visions of ships with white sails approaching distant shores, of men in metal armor carrying weapons that spat fire and death. He saw great cities burning, populations decimated by diseases for which there was no cure, and proud peoples driven from their ancestral lands. Yet, the visions also showed hope. He saw some of his people adapting, learning new ways while preserving the essence of their culture. He saw leaders who would guide the Cherokee through the trials ahead. And he saw himself among them, carrying the knowledge of the crystal to help his people survive and eventually thrive in a changed world. The crystal revealed to him the location of safe havens in the western lands, places where the Cherokee could retreat when the pressure from the newcomers became too great. It showed him which plants could cure the new diseases, which alliances would prove beneficial, and which paths would lead to destruction. When the visions finally ended, Atsila found himself on his knees before the pedestal, tears streaming down his face. The knowledge he had received was both a gift and a burden, the power to help his people, but also the terrible responsibility of knowing what was to come. As he carefully lifted the crystal from its resting place, he felt its weight in his hands, not just its physical mass, but the weight of ages, of accumulated wisdom, of the hopes and fears of countless generations. The crystal continued to pulse with inner light, and he understood that it had accepted him as its new guardian. The journey back to the village would be different from his ascent to the cave. Now he carried not just the crystal, but the knowledge of what it represented and the responsibility of deciding how to use its revelations. The young man who had entered the cave seeking a vision had emerged as something more, a keeper of ancient wisdom and a bridge between the old world and the new one that was coming. As he made his way back through the crystalline chambers toward the cave entrance, Atsila felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders. The spirits had chosen him for this role, and he would not fail them or his people. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them with the wisdom of the ancients and the strength of his Cherokee heritage. The crystal pulsed gently in his hands, a beacon of hope in the darkness that was to come, and a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming change, knowledge and preparation could light the way to survival. Chapter 3: The Wisdom of the Ancestors. Atsila's return to the village caused quite a stir. The young warrior appeared at dawn on the third day, carrying in his hands a strange glowing object that made everyone stop and stare in amazement. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts, dogs whined and backed away, and the elders exchanged glances of deep concern.
Atsila, my son, what have you brought to us?
Father, I have found what the spirits showed me. This is a message from the ancients, a warning of changes to come.
The crystal in his hands pulsed with soft light, responding to the presence of the gathered people. Eloheh cautiously approached, her eyes wide with wonder.
It's warm. I can feel its energy from here.
Old Keetoowah, the shaman, slowly approached, leaning on his hickory staff. His ancient eyes studied the crystal carefully, and Atsila saw recognition in them, as if the old man had seen something like this before.
Call the council. All the elders must see this.
Within an hour, the tribal council had assembled. Besides Nvhi and Keetoowah, there were War Chief Sequoia, Clan Mother Ayoka, and several other elders. They sat in a circle in the council house, while in the center, on a bearskin, lay the crystal, continuing to emit its mysterious glow. Atsila told them of his journey to the mountains, of the cave, and the visions the crystal had shown him. He spoke of ships with white sails, of pale-skinned people, of wars and diseases that would come with them. Some listened with growing horror, others with disbelief.
These are just the dreams of a young man. Pale-skinned people? Ships larger than our canoes? This is impossible. Our scouts have explored the lands for many days' journey in all directions. There are no signs of such people.
But the crystal, it showed me the truth. I saw it with my own eyes.
You saw what you wanted to see. Young warriors often mistake their fantasies for spirit visions.
Keetoowah raised his hand, calling for silence. When all were quiet, the old shaman slowly stood and approached the crystal.
Let me touch it.
Atsila nodded, and Keetoowah carefully placed his wrinkled hands on the crystal's surface. Immediately the object glowed brighter, and a wave of amazement crossed the shaman's face. His eyes closed, and he stood motionless. Minutes passed in tense silence. Finally, Keetoowah opened his eyes and stepped back from the crystal. His face was pale, and his hands trembled.
I saw. Great spirits, I saw the same things as Atsila. Ships like floating mountains, men in metal clothing, fire sticks that kill at a distance. This is not a dream or fantasy. This is prophecy, and it is true.
If this is true, what should we do? How can we prepare for something we cannot understand?
This object is ancient, older than our people, older than all the peoples we know. It was left here by those who lived before us, who possessed great knowledge. They knew that a time would come when their warning would be needed.
But what knowledge is this? What else can this crystal show us?
Atsila took the object in his hands again. This time the visions came easier, as if the crystal was becoming accustomed to his touch. He saw star maps showing the movement of celestial bodies years into the future. He saw knowledge of plants and their healing properties, of metals and their working, of ways to predict weather and seasons. But most importantly, he saw a map of lands far to the west, beyond the Great Plains, where his people could find refuge when the time came to leave their ancestral homes. The crystal showed him safe routes, water sources, places where new settlements could be established.
It shows us the path to salvation. When the time comes, and it will come, we will know where to go.
Even if all this is true, why should we prepare to flee? We are warriors. We will fight for our lands.
And we will fight. But the crystal shows that the enemies will be too strong. They will have weapons we don't understand, diseases against which we have no defense. Wisdom is not in dying in a hopeless battle, but in surviving and preserving our people for future generations.
What if we try to change the future? If we know what's coming, maybe we can prevent it?
Some things are inevitable, my daughter. The crystal shows not a possible future, but what must happen. But knowledge gives us the power to prepare, to survive, and to adapt.
The council continued until deep into the night. The elders argued, asked questions, tried to understand the meaning of what the crystal had shown them. Some suggested hiding the artifact, others wanted to study it further. But all agreed on one thing: this knowledge could not be ignored. Finally, Nvhi made a decision that would shape the future of their people.
We will keep the crystal secret from the rest of the village until we understand it fully. Atsila will be its keeper. The spirits chose him for this role. But we will also begin to prepare. We will teach our children new skills, create stores of supplies, study the western lands.
What if other Cherokee villages should know about this?
In time, when we ourselves better understand what this prophecy means. For now, we must be careful. Not everyone is ready to accept such truth.
When the council ended, Atsila remained alone with the crystal. Golilah approached him, her face showing a mixture of pride and concern.
You've changed. There's something different in your eyes now. The weight of knowledge.
I can no longer be just a young warrior. The spirits have placed upon me the responsibility for our people's future.
And I will be beside you, whatever the future brings.
Atsila squeezed her hand, feeling grateful for her support. But deep in his heart, he knew that ahead lay trials that would test not only their love, but the strength of their entire people. The crystal pulsed in his hands, reminding him that the time of change was already near. The council had accepted the truth of the prophecy, but Atsila understood that this was only the beginning. Soon, the knowledge contained within the crystal would be put to the test, and the survival of the Cherokee would depend on how well they could adapt to a world that was about to change forever. As he sat in the quiet council house, holding the glowing crystal, Atsila felt the weight of destiny pressing upon him. The spirits had chosen him to be a bridge between the old world and the new, and he would not fail in that sacred trust. Whatever trials awaited, he would face them with the wisdom of the ancients and the courage of his people. The crystal continued to pulse gently in his hands, a beacon of hope in the darkness that was to come. and a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming change, knowledge and preparation could light the way to survival. But soon, that knowledge would be tested in ways that none of them could yet imagine. Chapter 4: A People Divided. 2 weeks had passed since Atsila brought the crystal to the village, and the atmosphere in the settlement had noticeably changed. Although only the elders knew of the artifact's existence, rumors and whispers spread like ripples on water. People noticed the secret council meetings, saw how Atsila spent hours in solitude, holding something that emitted a strange light. The village began to divide into 2 camps. Some, led by Nvhi and Keetoowah, believed in the crystal's prophecy and quietly prepared for the coming changes. They studied new methods of food preservation, secretly sent scouts west to explore possible retreat routes, and taught the youth additional survival skills. Others, headed by Sequoia, considered all this superstition and a distraction from real problems. The war chief openly expressed his displeasure that the village's resources were being spent preparing for a mythical threat instead of strengthening defenses against real enemies, other tribes, or wild beasts. Atsila found himself at the center of this conflict. Each day he spent hours with the crystal, studying the visions it revealed. The artifact disclosed ever more knowledge about the movement of stars, the properties of plants, how to predict weather by barely noticeable signs. But most importantly, it continued to show scenes from the future, increasingly detailed and frightening. In one vision, Atsila saw the first meeting between his people and the pale-skinned strangers. It would not happen soon, many years hence, but when it did, the consequences would be catastrophic. He saw diseases brought by the foreigners decimating entire villages, saw how the strangers' metal weapons proved far more effective than Cherokee bows and spears. But the crystal also showed something else. He saw how some of his people learned new ways, adapted to the changed world, found methods to preserve their culture even under radically altered conditions. The key to survival was not resistance to change, but the ability to adapt while preserving what was most important, the spirit and traditions of the people. One morning, as Atsila sat by the river studying another vision from the crystal, Sequoia approached him. The war chief looked grim, his usually proud bearing tense.
Atsila, I need to speak with you.
The young warrior carefully hid the crystal in a leather pouch and turned to his elder.
I'm listening, Sequoia.
The village is dividing. People are beginning to doubt the council's decisions. They see how we spend time and resources preparing for a threat that no one can explain. Young warriors ask me why we're not preparing for real battles instead of chasing ghosts.
Sequoia, I understand your doubts, but what the crystal shows is not ghosts. It's real future.
Show me. If this object truly possesses such power, let me see these visions myself.
Atsila hesitated. Keetoowah had warned him that the crystal might show different things to different people, and not everyone was ready to accept what it revealed. But refusal would only strengthen Sequoia's suspicions.
Very well, but be prepared for what you'll see.
Sequoia took the artifact in his hands, and his eyes immediately widened in surprise. The crystal glowed brighter than usual, responding to the war chief's strong will. Sequoia froze, his gaze becoming distant, and waves of various emotions crossed his face: surprise, fear, anger, despair. The vision lasted longer than usual. When Sequoia finally released the crystal, his hands were trembling, and his face was pale.
What did you see?
Sequoia was silent for a long time, staring at the river water. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion.
I saw the end of our world. I saw our warriors falling under fire from metal sticks. I saw our children dying from diseases we don't understand. I saw.
He stopped, unable to continue.
You saw the Trail of Tears, the long journey west, full of suffering.
But I saw something else too. I saw how some of us survive, how they find new lands, build new homes, preserve our traditions for their children. The crystal showed me that you will be one of those who leads our people through the darkness to new light.
I don't want to be a leader, Sequoia. I just want to protect our people.
Sometimes that's the same thing. I will support you, Atsila, and I will help prepare our warriors for what's coming.
After this conversation, the atmosphere in the village began to change. Sequoia no longer opposed the council's plans, but instead became one of the most active supporters of preparation. He began training young warriors in new tactics based on what the crystal had shown him: how to fight against enemies with metal weapons, how to use knowledge of terrain for guerrilla warfare, how to organize retreats while preserving the maximum number of people. Gulalaihi also changed. She spent more and more time with the village women, teaching them new methods of food preservation, making medicines that could help on a long journey. The crystal had shown her visions of plants that grew in the western lands, and she began preparing seeds and saplings that could be taken along. But not everyone in the village accepted the new order. A group of old hunters, led by a warrior named Digadadoli, openly expressed dissatisfaction. They believed that all this preparation was a sign of weakness, that true Cherokee should fight and die on their native land rather than flee from an unknown threat.
If this object truly possesses such power, then let everyone see it. Let each person decide for themselves whether to believe in these visions.
Nvhi and Keetoowah were against a public demonstration. They feared that not everyone could properly understand the crystal's message, that it might lead to panic, or, conversely, to complete denial. But Atsila understood that he had no choice. The village was already divided, and only openness could restore unity. He agreed to show the crystal to everyone, but with the condition that each person who wanted to touch it must be prepared to accept what they would see. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening, at the full moon. The entire village gathered in the central square, around the sacred fire. Children sat beside their parents, elders leaned on their staffs, warriors stood with serious faces. The atmosphere was tense, full of expectation and anxiety. Atsila stepped into the center of the circle, holding the crystal in his hands. The artifact glowed brighter than usual, as if sensing the presence of many people. The young warrior began telling of his vision in the cave, of the prophecies the crystal had shown him, of the coming changes. When he finished, silence fell. Then Digadoli stood and said,
Words are just words. Show us the power of this object.
Let anyone who wishes touch it, but remember what you see will change you forever.
Atsila nodded and placed the crystal on the ground in the center of the circle. The first to approach was old hunter Digadoli. He looked challengingly at Atsila and placed his hands on the crystal. Immediately his face changed, his eyes widened, and his body froze in immobility. The vision lasted several minutes, and when it ended, Digadoli recoiled from the crystal, his face full of horror.
No, this cannot be true.
But others had already seen his reaction. One by one, the villagers approached the crystal, touched it, and received their visions. Reactions varied. Some cried, others prayed, still others stood in shock. But no one could deny the power of what they had seen. By the end of the night, the entire village knew the truth. The coming changes were inevitable, and they needed to prepare. The division was over now. Everyone understood that their survival depended on unity and preparation. But Atsila knew this was only the beginning. The crystal had shown him that the time of change was already near. Very soon, the prophecy would begin to come true, and then all their preparation would be tested in practice. The young warrior who had once sought only personal vision had become the keeper of his people's destiny. The weight of that responsibility pressed upon his shoulders, but he would not falter. With the wisdom of the crystal and the strength of his Cherokee heritage, he would guide his people through the trials ahead. The crystal pulsed gently in his hands, a reminder that the future, however dark it might seem, could still be shaped by those brave enough to face it with knowledge and preparation. But soon, that knowledge would be tested in ways that would challenge everything they believed about survival and adaptation. Chapter 5. The Prophecy Fulfilled. A month had passed since that memorable gathering, and life in the Cherokee village had changed beyond recognition. People worked with new purpose, preparing for an unknown future. Young warriors trained in new battle tactics. Women created stores of medicines and seeds. Elders passed on ancient knowledge to the youth that might prove useful in difficult times. Atsila had become the unofficial leader of these preparations. The crystal continued to show him visions, increasingly detailed and precise. He saw the routes by which the strangers would come, the places where the first clashes would occur, the ways his people could avoid the worst consequences of the coming changes. But the most important vision came to him in early November. The crystal showed him the shore of the great ocean that lay far to the east, beyond the lands of many tribes. On the horizon appeared Dot's ships with white sails that slowly approached the shore. The vision was so vivid and detailed that Atsila could smell the salty sea air and hear the cries of gulls.
This is happening now. They're already here.
Atsila immediately called a council of elders. When he told them of his vision, anxious silence fell over the council.
If they've already landed on the eastern shore, how long will it be before they reach our lands?
The crystal showed that many years will pass before they reach our mountains. But their influence will spread faster. Diseases, trade, changes in relationships between tribes, all this will begin much sooner.
What should we do? Send scouts east?
No. The crystal shows that direct contact now would be dangerous. We must continue preparing, but also begin establishing connections with other tribes. When the time comes, we'll need allies.
I can send messengers to our relatives in other Cherokee villages. They should know what's coming.
Over the following weeks, secret messengers departed from the village. They carried with them not the crystal, it was too valuable and dangerous for travel, but stories of the visions and warnings of coming changes. Reactions varied. Some villages took the warnings seriously and began their own preparations. Others rejected them as superstitions. Meanwhile, Atsila continued studying the crystal. The artifact showed him not only the future, but also the past, the history of the ancient civilization that had left this object. He learned that these people had also faced catastrophic changes, not an invasion of strangers, but a natural disaster that had changed the climate and made their lands uninhabitable. But they had prepared. They had created shelters, preserved knowledge, left messages for those who would come after them. The crystal was one such message, a guide for survival under conditions of radical change. One morning, when the first snow covered the mountains, a messenger arrived at the village from the eastern lands. He was exhausted from the long journey, his clothes torn, his eyes full of horror. The messenger brought news that confirmed their worst fears.
The strangers have landed on the shore. They've built a settlement and begun exploring the inland territories. They have weapons that spew fire and smoke, animals the size of elk but obedient as dogs, and diseases. Entire villages are dying from diseases no one has seen before.
The news spread through the village quickly, causing panic among those who still hadn't fully believed in the crystal's prophecy. But those who had been preparing met the news with grim determination. The time of trials had come. Atsila understood that he must see the strangers with his own eyes. The crystal showed him visions, but he felt the need for personal witness. Despite protests from Eloheh and his father, he decided to journey east to the ocean shore.
Atsila, it's too dangerous. What if you encounter these strangers? What if you bring back their diseases?
I must see them for myself. The crystal shows me visions, but I need to understand our enemy with my own eyes. Only then can I truly prepare our people.
The journey took 2 weeks. Atsila traveled carefully, avoiding major trails and settlements, relying on knowledge the crystal had given him. Along the way, he met refugees, people from coastal tribes who were fleeing from the strangers and their diseases. Their stories confirmed everything he had seen in visions. Finally, at dawn, on a cold December day, Atsila reached a high cliff that offered a view of the ocean. What he saw made his heart stop. On the horizon stood ships, huge wooden structures with white sails, exactly as the crystal had shown him. They were larger than any building he had ever seen, and there were many of them, an entire flotilla blocking the horizon. But even more striking was what was happening on the shore. The strangers had built a settlement, rows of wooden houses surrounded by a palisade. Smoke rose from many hearths, and people in strange clothing moved through the streets. Even at a distance, Atsila could see there were many of them, hundreds, perhaps thousands. But the most terrifying thing was what he saw on the beach. A group of strangers in metal clothing stood in formation, holding long metal sticks. At a command, they raised these sticks and pointed them toward the sea. A deafening roar erupted, and flames and smoke burst from the sticks. The water where they aimed exploded in fountains of spray. Atsila realized he was witnessing a demonstration of the weapons the crystal had shown him in visions. These were weapons against which his people's bows and spears would be powerless. He spent the entire day on the cliff, observing the strangers, studying their habits, their weapons, their methods of organization. When night fell, he saw them light fires, not campfires, but some other sources of light that burned steadily and brightly. The next morning, Atsila began the long journey home. In his heart was heaviness, but also determination. He had seen the enemy with his own eyes, and now knew that the crystal's prophecy was absolutely accurate. Change had come, and his people must be ready for it. The journey home took longer than the trip to the ocean. Atsila stopped in villages of other tribes, telling them what he had seen, warning of the coming danger. Some listened to him, others considered him mad, but the seeds of warning were sown. When he finally returned to his village, it was already midwinter. Snow lay deep, and the air was filled with smoke from hearths. Galilan met him at the village entrance, her eyes full of tears of relief.
I thought I had lost you.
I promised to return, and I have important news for the council.
That same night, he told the elders what he had seen. His descriptions of the ships, weapons, and settlement of the strangers filled the council with deep anxiety.
How much time do we have?
Atsila took out the crystal and concentrated on it. The visions showed him a timeline, the years that would pass before the strangers reached their lands.
20 years, maybe a little more. But their influence will come sooner, traitors. Diseases, changes in relationships between tribes.
Enough time to prepare, but not enough to relax. We must use every year, every season.
Throughout the remaining winter, the village worked with doubled energy. Plans that had once seemed distant now became urgent. Secret caches of supplies were created, western routes were studied, connections with allied tribes were established. Atsila and Galilahi married that spring, in a ceremony that was both celebration and farewell to the old world. They knew their children would grow up in a world radically different from the one in which they themselves had been raised. The crystal became the center of a new tradition in the village. Every full moon, the elders gathered around it, studying visions, planning the future, preparing for the trials that lay ahead. The artifact was no longer a secret. It had become a symbol of hope and wisdom, a guide for the people in difficult times. As Atsila held the crystal during one of these gatherings, feeling its warm pulse in his hands, he understood that his role as its guardian was just beginning. The prophecy was unfolding exactly as foretold, and soon his people would face the greatest test in their history. But they would be ready. With the wisdom of the ancients and the strength of the Cherokee spirit, they would survive whatever trials awaited them. The crystal had shown them the path through darkness to light, and Atsila would ensure that his people followed that path, no matter how difficult the journey might prove to be. The young warrior who had once sought only a personal vision had become the keeper of his people's destiny, and he would not fail in that sacred trust. The crystal pulsed gently in his hands, a beacon of hope in the darkness that was to come, and a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming change, knowledge and preparation could light the way to survival. Epilogue. Bridge between worlds. Many years have passed since that young Cherokee warrior named Atsila found the crystal in a mountain cave. The story I have told you tonight is based on legends passed down through generations among the Cherokee people, on records of the first European explorers, and on archaeological discoveries that continue to puzzle scientists to this day. The crystal's prophecy came true with terrifying accuracy. In 1540, 21 years after the events of our story, Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto became the first European to encounter the Cherokee. Others followed. Traders, missionaries, settlers. The Cherokee world was indeed changed forever. But the people survived. Thanks to the wisdom of individuals like Atsila, thanks to preparation and adaptation, the Cherokee were able to endure centuries of change while preserving their culture and traditions. Even during the tragic Trail of Tears in 1838, when thousands of Cherokee were forced to leave their ancestral lands, the knowledge and wisdom passed down by previous generations helped many survive. And what became of the crystal? Legends say it disappeared on the day the first Europeans set foot on Cherokee land, having fulfilled its purpose. Some believe it still lies somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, waiting for the next crisis when its wisdom will again be needed. Perhaps the crystal was an artifact of an ancient civilization that vanished long before the Cherokee arrived. Perhaps it was a gift from star travelers who once visited our planet. Or maybe it was something else entirely. A symbol that wisdom and knowledge can transcend any boundaries of time and space. Atila's story teaches us an important lesson. Change is inevitable, but preparation and adaptation can help us not merely survive, but thrive in a new world. Wisdom lies not in resisting change, but in understanding it and finding ways to preserve what is most valuable while adapting to new conditions. Today, as our world again stands on the threshold of great changes, technological, social, and environmental, the story of the Cherokee crystal reminds us of the importance of wisdom, preparation, and unity. Perhaps somewhere among us are our own Atsila's people who see farther than others and are ready to become bridges between the old and new worlds. The Cherokee understood something that we sometimes forget in our modern age: that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to adapt, the courage to change, and the determination to preserve what matters most for future generations. This has been Frank Sterling's Radio Theater. Thank you for spending this evening with me in the Appalachian Mountains, in a world of ancient mysteries and eternal wisdom. Before we part ways tonight, I want to ask a favor of you, dear listeners. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the bridges we build between past and future, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps us continue bringing you these tales from the shadows of history. Give this story a like if it touched your heart, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps our small editorial team stay motivated and reach more listeners who hunger for stories that matter. Until we meet again, when we'll once more journey through time and space, exploring the mysteries of the past and the lessons for our future. This is Frank Sterling, wishing you wisdom for the changes ahead and strength for the bridges you'll build.
In the mountains where the spirits dwell, our people's name. Crystal visions, ancient spell, the righteous way. Fire burns within my soul. Atsila, they call my name. Keeper of the sacred scroll, pain and wisdom, joy and shame. Oh, the crystal shows the path ahead through the darkness and the tears we'll shed. We will survive. Ancient knowledge keeps our spirit alive. My heart's desire through the the storm and through the fire. The way we'll find, leaving the old world behind. Know ye, Father, hear my cry. White sails come across the sea. Our children ask the reason why the world we knew will cease to be. But in the crystal sacred light, I see the path through endless night. The fire burns until our people's hope returns. From the mountains to the western plains, through the sorrow, through the pains, crystal wisdom lights the way for our children's day. Oh, the crystal shows the path ahead through the darkness, and the tears will shed. We will survive, ancient knowledge keeps our spirit alive. Love endures through the trials that time ensured. Forever true, the Cherokee spirit will see us through. Atsila, Atsila, Anyan we are. Keetoowah nohi Galilahi Eloheh ayeli Eloheh galokodi Unega amatsuna deloquasti Mayu hisdi Atsila mamnohi ugitaliani Nvhi Eloheh nohi Keetoowah ni Nvhi Eloheh nohi galakodi Eloheh galokodi Eloheh galokodi Ay